Keshav, can you confirm that you're able to see the screen?
Yes, we can see
It's
the screen.
working in full screen mode also?
Yep.
Okay, all right. Good morning, everyone. So I'll try to, in the next 30 minutes, I'll try to give you guys an overview of some very exciting developments that are happening in the health tech space in India. So in my opinion, India is probably at the cusp of a very interesting point on what will happen on health technology. And this is driven by something called the National Health Stack. So I'll start a bit talking about, uh, you know, uh, iSpirit, which is a not-for-profit organization that I am also a volunteer at. So iSpirit is a think and do tank, and usually likes to think with a very long view of different sectors, and mostly run by volunteers who all commit that they will not make anything for themselves, but largely do it for the larger good of the country. So one of the things that iSpirit has pioneered and pushed in India is something called India Stack. So many of you, I don't know how many of you know about India Stack. So I'll give you a very brief view of India Stack. Best to know that the world is really noticing what India has done in technology with India Stack. And there is a lot of talk about how other countries should now actually replicate this construct of digital public goods in their own countries and spaces. And if we get into India Stack, you'll find that it has got three layers. It has something that we call the identity layer. You will know this as Aadhaar, but many of you may also know that there are services on the top of Aadhaar like eKYC and eSign. Then there is the payments layer. Many of you have heard or used today use UPI, but there's also the Aadhaar's payment bridge and so on. So that's the payments layer. And finally, there's the data empowerment layer. We call it the DAPA architecture, which essentially is about how do you move data in keeping in mind the rules that are coming up with the data protection bill. So the mighty consent artifact, many of you have heard of DigiLocker, which is based on the same framework. There's a new RBI based entity called an account aggregator, which is primarily about sharing of your financial data using the data empowerment layer. So India Stack has kind of helped build this construct of many of these goods. I'll give you, and it's used for many use cases, from direct benefit transfer to lending to wealth management and insurances. And this is largely, so far, most of us have seen the power of India Stack in the financial services sector. The use case that is most famous for India Stack is this whole thing that we've been pushing from a long time, which is how do we get a street vendor that we name Rajni an intraday loan completely electronically. And if you think about the process of giving that loan, clearly you can think of all the digital goods that make it happen. So if Rajni needs to prove her, provide her identity and proof of address, you have the eKYC service from Aadhaar that does it. If Rajni has to sign a loan, you now have an e-sign service that can be signed. To send the money digitally to Rajni, you can use UPI and so on. So you can see that many digital public infrastructures with which have come in the market have enabled actually a large number of new companies to come in and build market innovations from the top. So iSpirit believes in this model of what we call as the jugalbandi between public infrastructure and private innovation. And we have shown that this is very doable at a country scale to benefit somebody like a Rajni, and actually make a big difference for millions of Indians if we can get this Jugalbandi to work together. And largely, we have seen a lot of good progress on this in the financial services space. Now, the exciting part is that we have also been working, and iSpirit has been working with the governments, with many entities on how to do this in the health space. So what I'll talk to you today is a bit about, what does this mean, this construct mean in the context of the health sector. So there are three reports for people interested in understanding this in more depth. I would urge you to go look at and read these reports. All these three reports are public, and if you Google the keywords, you will find them on the web. The first one that came out was the National Health Stack document that gives you the big picture of all of these components. But fundamentally, the health stack is a bunch of digital building blocks or digital public infrastructure that would enable health data and health tech in the for the overall ecosystem. And so that's the first paper that you should look at. The second one, so the government then created a committee on how to implement the national health stack. The output of that committee is called the National Digital Health Blueprint. In fact, as part of the economic package that was announced by the finance minister just a few weeks ago, one of the things that the finance minister announced was in the health sector, the confirmation that they are going to be doing the National Digital Health Mission, which is what the recommendation of the blueprint was. A third report that you can look at is the joint working group report between IRDA and NHA. NHA is the National Health Authority and IRDA is the Insurance Regulatory and Development Authority, on how to reform health claims. So these are three reports that will point you in the direction of how the digital public goods on health are coming. But to give you the big picture, the National Digital Health Blueprint essentially lays out at the very bottom of the layer something that we call as the health stack, which is how do you essentially achieve a flow of health information as well as claims in a way that's completely interoperable and works for a model like India. And it talks about three specific foundational blocks that need to come in. One area is what we call as the electronic registries. And this is about, think about it as master data that needs to be solved. So for example, in any healthcare interaction, you will need to know who's the doctor, what was the provider that provided the treatment, and so on. So these are master data that can be used by anybody. The second one is the construct of a personal health record. To be able to create health information, it talks about building the health records in the context of the patient and puts the patient in control of his own health records. But it also moves the model from current records to more standardized digital formats, including for discharge summaries, diagnostic reports, prescriptions, and so on. And the last part of it is about a new technology layer that will enable much better claims processing using something called a health claims platform. And there is also an approach to how we would be able to get anonymized and aggregated health data and national level health analytics out of it. So that's what the big blueprint is. I'll give you a quick, now when the government and the private sector come together to start working and building this new ecosystem, there are several benefits that we expect to happen. The first and foremost expectation that we can all have is that every one of us, a billion Indians, are going to be able to have personal health records on their phone. So it's not going to be very far now when you probably already, when you go for a blood test, you're probably getting an SMS saying you can see that report on the phone. Imagine if that was on a standard that happened for India where your longitudinal health record could get built in. So what could you expect to see in your PHR? It's typically things that's already been given to you by a hospital to you. So diagnostic reports, discharge summaries, prescriptions, maybe even bills is likely to be what you will see on your personal health record. The second thing, and the COVID crisis really brought out, and some of you who are, if you're working in that space, know that there's been a large jump in demand in teleconsultations. Now, in a teleconsultation context, it's clearly very important for your doctor on the other end to be able to see your history. And so one of the things that the stack will do is be able to do two things. One, be sure that you're actually dealing with a verified doctor on the other hand. Two, share your reports with whichever doctor you want. Three, be able to get a e-prescription back in a standard format, which you can then probably ship off to a e-pharmacy as you kind of go on. So those elements are going to be part of the stack. The third thing is India is still very poor on insurance coverage. And generally, globally, as we go towards universal healthcare, today, India largely covers what we call as inpatient claims. So when you're having a surgery or when you're getting admitted in the hospital is when the insurance kicks in. But it's already well known that over 70% of healthcare costs actually come from OPD visits and medications. And that's not covered through any insurance. So, and one of the reasons why it's not covered is the cost of processing a health claim today in India, and we'll talk a bit about that later, is over 600 rupees. And whereas the claim cost of a OPD visit is likely to be 500 rupees, including medication. So one of the things that the stack will do is actually do two things. One, come up with a technology architecture that helps actually introduce OPD visits in India. And two, improve both on-time payments as well as cost of processing, bring down cost of processing for claims, health claims overall. The other thing that we expect it to do is to do things like monitoring of outbreaks. So I'll not use a COVID example, but let's talk about dengue. It's been around with us for quite some time, but there isn't really a systematic way. But imagine if data from every lab, there was a way by which an aggregated feed of where positive cases were be able to available as a feed for public health purposes. So those are the kind of things that are going to happen. And so monitoring for outbreaks is something that's going to happen. Many of you are in the startup space, probably actively looking at and know that AI is very big in healthcare, specifically in the area of medical diagnostics. And AI has made lots of inroads, but AI is also requiring is very, very data hungry. The health stack is going to provide a way by which you can actually create large, high quality consented data sets in the Indian context for for your AI work. And that's one of the things that we expect the health stack to do. And finally, we think it will actually improve preventive care. So let's take the example of, for example, Ayushman Bharat. Ayushman Bharat is a scheme from the government of India that covers about 500 million Indians for 5 lakh rupees of health cover. One of the top claimed procedures under Ayushman Bharat is something called PTCA or cardiac stents. Now, cardiac conditions are very well understood with a series of health biomarkers. Imagine, and we know, for example, how many claims we would get. Now, imagine if we could incentivize an organization that would actually take a cohort of people with poor cardiac biomarkers and improve their condition so that the number of claims that would come for cardiac stents would actually be lower the next year. So you would actually be able to pay for it. So you would actually have models that could actually deliver preventive care and have incentives to drive preventive care. So we are looking at the health stack enabling a whole host of new opportunities in health tech as it comes out. Now, this session was really, what is it in it for startups? All this sounds good, but where do we see opportunities for startups? So I've kind of tried to put together a bunch of things that we can then discuss later on the panel or through your Q&A as to where do startups have a possibility of a play. So this is a very busy diagram, but I just wanted to bring out the architecture for the personal health record. Now, the personal health record architecture requires hundreds and thousands of labs and hospitals to actually come online as part of the participation. We don't think this is going to be possible unless there are a bunch of new young startups or companies in the market that are actively working to bring on board these hospitals and diagnostic centers. So on the left side, you will see a terminology that's called a health information provider. So if I'm a hospital or running a nursing home today, for me to participate in this new ecosystem, I need to comply or become a health information provider. Becoming a health information provider means that I will need to invest in some piece of software that is able to talk the standardized language that is coming out as part of the health stack. And we think they will not be able to do it themselves. So there is a new class of players we see, SaaS players we see, who will be actually providing supply to them to help them and enable them to come on board. And so that's part of it, part of the piece. So the way this market would work in our view is that there would be an enabling policy. And I'll just put an example. This is not the policy today, but we expect something similar to be coming out to help kickstart the ecosystem, that any health provider should provide a digital version of a health report via the national standard if they're giving a paper version of the report to the patient. So that would mean that today hospitals who are giving either diagnostic reports, discharge summaries, or other items would have to release a digital version of that report into the health locker, right? And that it doesn't have to be free. They can charge a very small fee for providing that report to the patient. Now that creates, in our view, 3 new market opportunities for players from the private ecosystem to actually come and solve this, right? So one, like I said, we need people who will actually become HIP and HIU data bridges. So SaaS providers that will then go work with diagnostic labs or hospitals and make sure that they can participate in this PHR as well as the health data ecosystem. The second is actually a whole bunch of applications for consumers. So if I'm able to see my data on my phone, what's the best way I can see it? Can it give me more insights than just viewing my data? Is there better ways to share or more efficient approaches to it? So there is going to be opportunities in the consumer side for what can you help a person do with their health records. Finally, we see the market go in two phases towards standards. In the beginning, a health provider can release the report in the existing formats that they're giving the printout. So typically that's a PDF format, it's non-standard, it's not coded, but it's still human readable and machine readable. And we think there'll be need for several techniques and data conversions where you can extract information out of this report that's useful for either reporting purposes or for many other purposes. But over time, the incentive system is designed and will be designed to move people to using more standard approaches, including, for example, e-discharge summary. So think of it that as a hospital today is able to give you a PDF of a discharge summary, but in the future will have to give you a more codified e-discharge summary, but as it starts to participate in this ecosystem. So that's one set of opportunities we think will start coming, and people who are interested or looking at working with hospitals or diagnostic centers should start looking or studying this area to make sure that they can participate in this opportunity once it comes in. The second area that the health stack is going to refine is actually how health claims are processed. So this is a picture of how health claims are processed today. So if let's say you go to a large hospital, and we're all in Bangalore, so let's say I'm going to say a Manipal hospital on Old Airport Road. They have a room that they call a TPA room. And if you walk in there with your insurance card and pull out your insurance card, the process that's followed, and there are about 35 different insurers and TPAs, is largely different for every insurer and every TPA. So it's a very large room with different people representing that one insurer or that one TPA. Even today, bulk of the claims are filled by hand. Many of them are scanned and sent by email. It used to be fax in the past. A few insurers and TPAs have now come up with portals where you can actually enter it or fill it out. But then it's still, if as a hospital I wanted to find out, what is the status of a claim, I usually still have to send an email or go look up a portal which is specific to that insurer. That makes reconciliation, reporting, management of claims actually quite painful. It also makes the process very expensive. I have actually met maybe 2 or 3 companies that have been trying to solve the problem without changing the underlying layer. So they have built software layers on the top, which can then have adapters for each specific type of process. Now, when the National Health Authority and the IRDA looked at this process, they came up with a slightly different approach or recommendation. And this is the recommendation, and we expect this to actually play out in the coming months in India. The first and foremost idea is that any claim that today is being filled out on paper, there would be a standard e-claim format and an e-discharge format that can be used to initiate a claim. And this would be true and acceptable by every insurer, both public and private. This would mean that hospitals would need new software which can then help them create these claims in. So we are saying that hospitals should pick from the market, from any software which can actually create these e-claim formats. And these e-claim formats are to be submitted to much like you can think of a stock exchange for trading, how we dematted shares and then you use a stock exchange for trading. You can think of it in a very similar way that the health claims platform would be present in the market, hosted as a digital public infrastructure on which you could submit a claim. Its role is primarily to route it to the appropriate payer. So from a hospital, if you originated a claim in the standard format, it would get routed to the appropriate TPA or insurer. Now the TPA or insurer, because it's coming in digitally, can actually again invest in software that helps them do things like auto adjudication. Now, if you look at Western markets outside of India, India's claim processing, almost 100% of the claims are manually adjudicated. Out in the Western markets, almost over 90% of the claims are auto adjudicated by machines. So this would actually enable, this architecture would actually enable new software for auto adjudication, for fraud, waste, and abuse prevention that can be installed by the insurers and TPAs for more efficient claim processing. So that's going to be a second opportunity, servicing either insurers or TPAs or servicing hospitals to be able to process their claims as these recommendations play out. Now, the National Health Authority is basically the government body that has quite a few plans to drive adoption of the stack. And there are three things that they are pushing from their perspective. One, they're pushing something called a doctor directory, which will actually allow doctors to come online, digitally sign e-claims, discharge summaries, even prescriptions, right? So the whole process can go paperless. The benefit for the National Health Authority is that they also know who's the doctor behind the treating patient. And there are several cases or several scenarios where that helps reduce fraud. The second thing is personal health records. One of the things that the National Health Authority cares about is that there is effective continuum of care across primary, secondary, and tertiary care. And that can only happen if health records from primary and secondary care as well as tertiary care actually come together in the context of a patient. And that's what the personal health record is empowering. And the last bit is actually convergence. And you saw that with the claims convergence, but there is also the need for convergence in the technology layer across public health insurance schemes. Public health insurance has many schemes apart from PMJY. So PMJY just did about 1 crore of claims since its launch less than 2 years ago. But there is also ECHS, ESIC, CGHS, and so on. So the health claims platform helps the government also drive public claims apart from the private claims onto a common technology infrastructure. So that's the other driver that's kind of happening. And wanted to share with you that, we are not really talking about something which is very, very far out. The ball has been rolling on this for some time now. So the PHR framework, the people who are interested should go look up Project ACA on GitHub that has the open APIs and the APIs associated with how the PHR would work. There is a developer sandbox coming out in July from the National Health Authority. The standard objects that would be used in the interchange, also called e-objects. There are industry reviews that are happening starting in July. And the sandbox version of the health claims platform is expected to be put out by the National Health Authority by about October 2020. So overall, exciting times and lots of new opportunities cooking. And I hope we can discuss, or I can help you understand more about what's happening in this space as part of the panel discussions. Thank you. Back to you, Keshwar.
Yeah. Hey, thank you, Kiran. Actually, thank you very much. I think we have Sanjita also. I think so. We have to say back to Sanjita. Sanjita, are you there?
Yeah, hi.
Hi.
Hi, everyone.
Ah.
So we'll get started?
Yes. Yeah. Over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Kiran. That was, I think, a great download on the National Health Stack. And I think most of us were curious to know more about it because I think iSpirit and National Health Stack have been in the talks for some time now. So I think it was a great week.
One quick question is, this is the first time I think publicly we are presenting National Health Stack. Am I right, Kiran? Kiran, you're on a mute.
Not really. Actually, there's been lots of discussions on the National Health Stack quite recently. There's also multiple terminologies in play because the first version that came out by Niti Aayog, it was called the National Health Stack. Then when the next version of the report came out, they renamed it to the National Digital Health Blueprint. And then the blueprint recommended the creation of a National Digital Health Mission. So, there are three terminologies that you might see in the press or in talks out there. So sometimes it can get a little confusing, but we're typically still talking about the same thing, more or less. Very recently, there was, when the COVID crisis was on, many players from the telemedicine industry came together into what's called now the Swasth Alliance. So the Swasth Alliance has also been a big supporter and of the health stack, but they have come up with another name, which is the Bharat Health Stack. So, the word health stack is kind of getting to be a bit overused. iSpirit itself has been running multiple open houses to make sure that the ecosystem players who are interested can understand this better. So there is in fact an open house starting at 11:30 today, I think, by iSpirit, and there were 2 open houses in the last 2 Saturdays.
Thank you, Kiran. Over to you,
Yeah.
Sanjay.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Kesava. Yeah, in fact, I attended one of these last week, and I think it's been quite a discussion. Great to know that there's so much work happening for the National Health Stack. I think it's about time. So we'll just get started with the panel discussion. I think, first of all, thank you all so much for making out time on a Saturday morning. And thank you all the attendees. I think most of the crowd today here is aspiring entrepreneurs or entrepreneurs who have their own startups and are looking to seek advice from a round of panelists that we have today, which is a mix of mentors, investors, founders themselves. So I think it will be a great discussion. Why don't we quickly start with introductions first, so that the audience has a brief overview and insight into who do we all have today. So maybe I'll just bring it over to you one by one, and we can just do quick 2-line intros if that's okay. So we'll probably start with you, Kiran, and then we can go around the table.
Sure. So I have a technology background. So started as a telecom engineer, started in Infosys actually, and then spun out a company from Infosys in 2000. That company on mobile went public in 2008. So if you call somebody and you're now listening to a COVID message, that's one of the biggest products that on mobile did.
Interesting.
2010, it was supposed to be music, guys, and so, so it kind of changed. And 2010, basically, I decided that I wanted to do something with more social impact. So worked for 2 years with Aadhaar. So was a volunteer with Aadhaar for 2 years. And then in 2012, I started a chain of eye hospitals. So I run a chain of eye hospitals for, I have a district level model. So we have a model where we have a hospital typically at the district capital. We have these vision centers that we run on telemedicine in the taluka level towns, and we have mobile eye clinics that we send for village level care. So it's a social impact kind of a model. So we have about 14 hospitals across different parts of Karnataka now. And about in 2018, I've been working with iSpirit now for about 3 years on the health stack, because I believe that there is a big difference that technology can make to how healthcare is delivered in India. So I've been a practitioner of care in my rural markets. And in 2018, when the government announced the Ayushman Bharat program, I actually went and started volunteering with in Delhi to help build the technology for the program. So I've been for the last 2 years now, help them build the whole technology stack that currently runs the Ayushman Bharat program, and also been working with the government, been a member of many of these committees of the National Health Stack, the National Digital Health Blueprint, as well as the Joint Working Group. So that's a
Thank you.
not a
Thank
very
you,
short
Kiran.
intro. Sorry about that.
No, no problem. I think that's a great intersection of policy as well as just the operative hat. So it's great to have. Over to you, Abhinav, on that note.
Hey, thanks, Sanjita. Hey, good morning, everyone. Mine's going to be shorter than Kiran's. So I'm Abhinav. I'm a software engineer by profession. Very standard Bangalore track. Passed out in 2002. Studied computer science. Then I worked for a variety of software services company, and finally ended up at spent a lot of time with Thomson Reuters and Microsoft, working largely on 2 domains. With Thomson Reuters, I was doing a lot of work on finance, creating products for financial modeling and helping wealth advisors work with their customers. And at Microsoft, I was working more around mobility. And this is Microsoft's crazy mobility years while they were trying to figure out mobility. I don't think they ever did. This is up to 2015, and I think 2015 I was at a crossroads. I was trying to figure out what I need to do, what I want to do. And that's when I met Dr. Charit Bograj, who's an interventional cardiologist in Bangalore. And, he
Abhinav,
came
I think your
to,
network is a little patchy. So if you could just speak louder also, and
sure, is this better?
yeah, I think this is much better.
Okay.
Thank you.
So yeah, in 2015, I met Dr. Charit Bograj, who's a cardiologist, and he came to us with a problem. With us, there are four founders. Him being the CEO, and he's a cardiologist. He came to us with a very basic problem that look, people are dying of heart attacks, and really the problem here is not that we don't have we're not able to treat them, or we don't have the infrastructure for it. We have the doctors, we have the infrastructure. The problem is they don't get detected in time. Right? So people, there's a lot of missed diagnosis and there's a lot of misdiagnosis. And I asked myself this question: is this a problem worth solving? It's definitely yes, because there's literally people dying just because they're not getting access to diagnostics in time. Can we do something about it? By we, it was a team. The other two people are from hardware and algorithms background. I'm from a software background. We felt definitely yes, we can do something about this, right? And that's when we started our journey of Tricog. And in the last 5 years, we have diagnosed over 3.5 million ECGs in under 10 minutes across India and Southeast Asia, and now we move to certain parts of Africa as well. It has been enlightening. I'm not from the medical background, and coming as a techie, I had to rewire myself as to how I think about tech within the within this sector, because it's very different from how you approach it within, let's say, a finance sector or you say a consumer sector, right? But very exciting, and I think I'm also very excited by what Kiran has presented. It gives me a lot of hope that we can take much larger leaps now with having this public policy backing around digital technology. Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much, Abhinav. On that note, I think we got some 45% of people responding that AI/ML is going to play a huge role in health tech. And I think Tricog exactly leverages that, right? It's also an interesting combination of people coming together, some hardware, software, a doctor himself. So I think we look forward to hearing more about that. Over to you, Shri. You're on mute, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So my name is Sri Muthu. I am a venture capitalist in digital health. We specifically focus on early stage healthcare startups, primarily out of academic medical centers and universities. We are based out of New Haven, Connecticut. We're affiliated with Yale University, which is how I know the IIM folks. And we do work in India with NRCL, with IMB, Social Alpha, as well as CCAMP in Bangalore as our primary partners. And we also have partnerships in Oxford University and in Beijing. So our focus is just really on early stage digital health companies with the thesis that healthcare is going to be a global phenomena, and solutions that are built, let's say in India, are just as applicable in the rest of the world if we just take a little bit of time to think about that as a potential market from day one. My background is also originally a technology person many, many years ago in wealth management. I was largely in wealth management, then in payments. Actually came to India in 2009 to talk about what was the US version of UPI at that time, to see if there was some interest with the State Bank of India. So had some experience thinking about how to think about large designs, and very, very excited to see what's coming out of the Indian market in these days. So thank you for inviting me.
Thank you so much. And I think almost half of the crowd, if not more, are aspiring co-founders or startup entrepreneurs, and they would definitely benefit to get some insight from what is the investor hat. So I think we look forward to hearing about that. So over to you, Surya Narayan. And I think I know you are someone who wears multiple hats, so maybe a little bit of color on that.
Yeah, I'm a chartered accountant by training. I spent about 15 years in the pharma industry, starting with Nicholas when it was multinational, pre-pyramid days, and then came to Bangalore and joined a very small family-run company, took them public in '94, got oversubscribed 14 times, and helped them exit all the brands to Cadila in 2000. After that, I started 3 healthcare startups. First was a disease management company, and one of the first TPAs, Mediassist, and then a chain of pharmacies called Lifecare, which got exited to Religare. Medibiz and MediAssist got acquired by Reliance. And then I was running NSSL for 2 years, 2009 to 2011. And since then, I'm a mentor there. I'm also in the board of TiE Bangalore.
Great to know.
And currently, I do pro bono mentoring to startups, all kinds of startups, early stage preferably, particularly health tech and ed tech.
Great. I think we have all kinds of persona now today on the panel. Maybe I'll just quickly introduce myself. So I basically work with Bloom Ventures. It's an early stage investment company that is seeded out of India. We are about 100 million odd fund. I specifically look at health tech as one of the practice areas, investment areas that we deal with. Of course, we are a sector agnostic fund. In fact, Abhinav here, Tricog, they're one of our portfolio companies. And we've had several other investments such as Healthify Me, Tricog being one, then there is Vito, and some bunch of others, right? So let's get started directly, maybe. And let's basically just tee off the discussion with one question that I have for all of you, and which is also in the interest of the audience that we have today. So I think there have been some major shifts, right? And I'm not just talking about the current situation, which is the last few months given COVID, but I think overall the policy ecosystem and as well as just how people use tech in healthcare has changed over the last 4 or 5 years, I would say. And some of these factors are catalyzing it, like policy, whereas something like a med tech might just get more regulated. So I just wanted to understand maybe a brief excerpt from each one of you on what are those major changes that you see that have already happened, and maybe some futuristic view into what are those interesting opportunity areas that are going to open up for someone who's trying to scout out the space and trying to sort of landscape it a little bit, basically potentially identify an opportunity to do something. So why don't we start with in the same order, maybe, Kiran?
Sanchita, I think we should let the others have a go. I have already talked a lot about
All right.
What's coming. So
okay. So maybe let's go in the reverse order then. Surya Narayan, sir, please.
Yeah. So this technology in health tech has been going on some time, and this current pandemic has really accelerated the whole thing. So I have what we call a BCAD movement, before computers and after digital. So now the advantage is a lot of work is going on tech stack, but what startups need to work on is how does the tech stops at diagnostics and information. So how is it converted into outcome for patients? That's the real business. So there's a lot of logistics involved, regulations of doctors, nurses, all that is required. So the opportunity will come in that space now. So logistics, getting the right time, just time material, and getting the right people on board. The other one will be the huge investments in large specialty hospitals will come down, and I'm foreseeing small stacks of OT ICU centers with doctors being using telemedicine and coming in whenever required. So these centers will have an OT room, ICU room, and a telemedicine room. So all the doctors will come in and patch on. So that it will be all available all over the country and all over nearby places. So instead of having one large multi-crore investment, they'll have small patches all across the city. So then there will be opportunity for all our startups to service them. Because then they won't no need of any hospital beds at all. So they can do, because of this isolation, you can do a ICU at home. You can have, so in my first startup, I could set up a ICU in a bedroom in 24 hours. That was 20 years ago. So now technology is really helping. And so all this distribution will give a lot of opportunities for healthcare at home, healthcare analysis. Data will be the big winner. So AI ML is going to be the role playing, and then it heads towards personalized medicine. Each one will be getting medicine based on their health stack records and maybe even gene. So that's where it's going to go in the future. So a very targeted approach to disease cure and also preventive. nutrition is going to play a very huge role. Currently, nutrition is ignored.
Absolutely. I think I hear you saying multiple things. One of them is obviously sort of unbundling of the tertiary care facility that we have. And you pointed out ICU at home is an interesting model, maybe. You also said telemedicine, great that we have this recent guideline, not so recent now that it has been a couple of months. But I think the telemedicine guideline was really steering in the right direction with that, right? So totally with you. I think there are opportunities across the continuum of care. Thank you for actually lining them up for the audience. So maybe Abhinav, over to you. In what do you think are the right opportunities, and also some level of thinking in how do you identify the right one, since you've sort of done that for Tricorp?
Sure. So I'll give you a little bit of how I view, healthcare, and it's a spectrum. So one thing I'm going to leave a little bit aside right now is wellness. So things like dieting and all that, I'll leave that aside. I'm not really that involved into it, but that's a large B2C consumer play. But I'll differentiate that as wellness. Now, when you're talking about health tech, I think what we are seeing in the last 5 years, a lot of innovation happening around digitizing everything around the healthcare. So let's say appointment bookings, e-pharmacies. This is all around the satellites around the core of health tech where doctors operate, right? With the likes of Practos, with the likes of all these e-pharmacies, that has happened very well. And that in a sense is decentralizing hospitals, which would be aggregators for all of these services around the healthcare. This is great. It's going to help us scale if we can take doctors via telemedicine, and we'll help them scale, make them 2 times, 3 times, 4 times more efficient, right? And that 100% needs to happen. However, what I believe is that the need is so large that even if you do this 3x, 4x, it isn't enough. I think at the core of it, if you're still trying to say that healthcare is about getting doctor time to a patient in a one-on-one setting, that will always remain limited. You'll never be able to build enough doctors to, to supply that demand ever. I think that is not good. So if we really want to get deep into it, what we need to do is we need to be able to scale up doctors and scale up their expertise into a 100x, into a 200x. And that's, I think, a more long-term view, more challenging approach to do this, because it's not just about creating the tools and technologies. You're really trying to get into things like protocols of care. How do you make that work? One of the examples that I'll give you is, for us, one of the exciting projects, not the most profitable, but the most exciting, was when we worked in a situation in Goa, where we worked with a really thought leader from Goa Medical College who said that, look, I'm going to wire up 12 of my spokes with using Tricorp machine, where I will get to know if there are heart attacks happening. Now, the protocols that are accepted in the world are more Western protocols in a resource-rich environment. So what they would say is that if a guy comes in with a heart attack, airlift him with a chopper to the nearest tertiary. Not possible in India, not possible in large parts, right? But this doctor said that, look, we don't need to do it this way. What we're going to do is we're going to administer the patient thrombolysis, like a blood thinner, at the point of care at that point, and then we're going to get him, move him to a tertiary care hospital, right? A small change in protocol enabled with a startup like ours, where we provide them digitally, do the ECG, and our team actually interprets the ECG within 5 minutes. And then what that doctor is doing is he's instructing technicians or junior doctors in the spoke hospitals to be able to do more work. So you don't need a top-level cardiologist everywhere, but we were able to bring his expertise in a more interesting fashion down to the spoke level. So Sanchita, this is what I think Kiran has spotted many opportunities, which is going to be around enabling the logistics around healthcare. There'll be many more opportunities into bringing doctors to patients via telecommunication, telemedicine. And if you really want to get deep into it, it is more into figuring out how can we scale up doctors 100x. And that will require participation from healthcare experts, from policy making, and from startups. It's a long, challenging road, but I think very rewarding. Thanks.
I think that's very interesting. That's a great point of view. You're right. Just I think the broader point here being that even the right formats of triaging, which you all also do, can help capacity augmentation, right? Doctors can be scaled up that easily. Completely with you on that. Very interesting point of view. So maybe on that note, Shri, what does the investor ecosystem think about it, right? Like all the opportunities that have been laid out here, and quite a few, I must say, in a relatively short period of time. Which ones do you think, as an investor, you're keen about? Since we obviously know, I also being on the same side of the table, that often we bucket opportunities into scalable and non-scalable, basis tech, non-tech, etc. So what's your...
Yeah, and thank you for that. As VCs, we start with a slightly longer term perspective, right? So the fundamental premise of we get that if you look at the diagram that Kiran showed of all the components of the stack and all the people in the pictures of the stack, those all are points of places where there are solutions. However, as VCs, I don't care about the solution that's here today, nor do I care for the solution that's here tomorrow. I'm thinking, what is going to be in place 3 to 5 to 7 years down the road? And what does that solution stack look like? And who will be the players solving that particular problem, right? To talk to something that Dr. Suryanarayanan said and Abhinav said, when we think about this problem we're trying to solve, the frame that I always ask my team is, is it solve the problem of, can I use it anytime? Can I use it anywhere? And can I use it with anyone? Right? Where it's not just the physician anymore, or the clinician, or the nurse, or the community health worker, or an AI, or a chatbot. If you can answer those 3 questions of what that potentially could look like 3 years from now, or 5 years from now I'm interested in your product, right? And then to your point, if you can tell me that this product is not just a point solution for one state, but actually can scale across all the Indian states, maybe the Middle East, maybe Southeast Asia, maybe Africa, because the stack, as you point out, is a pretty standard stack, and you can scale it. And these are low resource countries where I think India has a huge advantage, right? Because we're sort of a mix of a low resource country with high resource intelligence, right? So we have this reverse innovation concept that India has amazingly exported to the rest of the world by shipping people overseas, right? But so when I see teams from India who are working on things that they know are going to solve the stack problems, with answering those 3 key questions and can scale, now I'm interested. That's the one I'm interested. People running around trying to solve COVID tomorrow, or running around to solve telemedicine. Look, we've already solved that problem. It's just a matter of getting it to scale. Right? So I'm not interested.
Got it. Interesting point of view. And just maybe expanding that on a little bit, any double click a particular vertical that you're more interested in, or is it the horizontal platforms that sort of keep you more engaged?
The horizontal platforms are easy to scale. I think the verticals that we're really paying attention to is something somebody had said before, which is there's the regulated industries, which are the hospitals, the drugs, the clinics, and so forth. And it's a pretty big market, right? It's a very huge dollar amount. But the unregulated market, the wellness industry, or the half in between industry in India, that's an even bigger market, right? It's a consumer product market primarily that focuses about wellness, right? My dad, who will not spend a lot of money on prescription drugs, will spend a lot of money on vitamins, right? That's a wellness package model. So from a vertical perspective, that's, I think, actually another interesting area, because India also has this alternative medicines and traditional medicines that are not actually being scaled yet.
Got it. Very interesting perspective. So now, related to, since we talked about so many opportunities, and Kiran, I think would love to hear your perspective on what does the national health stack particularly catalyze or accelerate, right? Which opportunities should the founders be focusing on, entrepreneurs be focusing on?
Yeah, I think it's going to play out, at different times, you're going to see different things come into play, right? So in the very beginning, when the ecosystem is in the early stages, the highest need is going to be people who are going to actually help all of these diagnostic centers and hospitals come on board, right? So, there is going to be policy. We are hoping that there will be some policy support to drive adoption from these players. But if that's not met by service on the other side from the market, you're not going to have the creation of that ecosystem, right? That's one part of the I think that's where you'll see the initial, I think, traction for players who manage to kind of get into that kind of space. The same is true for probably in the health insurance and the insurance claim space. I've seen several startups which have been trying to tackle the problem of more efficient claims processing. And so again, in those that probably take on the standard side early will probably have an advantage in, because each hospital is probably going to need some, and will, in fact, the demand for it is already very high, because there are startups trying to solve for it, even with the current limited or poor architecture. So we think that you're going to see that, but that still requires the public good. And so that's probably a second layer play. I think the next layer is going to be actually people who now once, so we are talking, so we know the language that iSpirit uses is that we are still in the plumbing, we're trying to lay the pipes to get the water to flow, and only later on when you turn the tap on, can you say, okay, what can I do with this water, right? So the next layer is going to be actually players who know or can work with the data. And that's where this whole AI piece comes in. And just like when the telemedicine policy came out, one of the things that, it's not that telemedicine wasn't happening in India prior to the policy, it's just that whether there was legality, government support for it was in question, right? There's a similar kind of a problem today in terms of collecting, using health data for AI. I mean, let's say I'm an AI startup today and I want, 500,000, chest X-ray scans to help in COVID for the Indian conditions. I'm not going to be able to get access to those in a way that's clean and clear across all players, right? So there are both legal frameworks as well as technology frameworks coming, I think, to help solve the problem for India. And I have seen very good work happening both at Niti Aayog as well as part of the stack and in some of this one. So you should see also not just the plumbing help get easier access to that data, but also the legal and the other structures that would support these startups to be able to use these techniques to actually solve for India's hard problems, right? And so that's the other bit. So you should see that come as a second layer. And then, of course, there's going to be a lot of opportunity, I think, for health analytics and health analytics players, and then people who need them, whether it's policymakers, whether it's pharmaceuticals, or whether it's other layers, who then can use some of these anonymized aggregated data to actually provide value and knowledge and insights to a bunch of ecosystems. So I do think this is going to be very, very instrumental for several different class of people who are trying to solve for the place. The last bit that I just want to bring out is that I do think it's going to make a big difference in primary care for two reasons. One, the government has a very huge push on primary care through something called the Health and Wellness Center Initiative. So the government wants to set up about 150,000 health and wellness centers. That's one for every 5,000 people. And it wants to run an NCD screening program around it. But if you look at the staffing of the center, it's mostly run by non-doctors, right? So it's run by a mid-level healthcare provider. And to provide a prescription at that layer, it's impossible to do that unless the government also uses, telemedicine technology as well as e-prescriptions and other standards. So we do think that, and we don't know whether, that's going to be again another market in which many players can participate as it stands today, but that is possibly another layer with Prime coming in also to kind of open up the market. And all of these, if you see, the health stack is like a foundation layer that's going to hopefully enable many of these use cases, and we should start seeing the benefits of it in 2 to 3 years from now.
Got it. So I think for the people working on ideas, I think this was a good roundup of what all are the white spaces in this space, and how are we thinking about what policies accelerate what, right? To your last point, Kiran, about the sub-centers and the PHCs trying to transform into sort of a wellness center model. You're right, ANMs mostly run these centers without necessarily a doctor in place, right? I do find the infrastructure a bigger challenge while we can have tools like telemedicine, but I think when it comes down to internet, it breaks, for example. So hopefully those problems also get solved in tandem, because I think infra and healthcare delivery do tend to go hand in hand, right? Given most of us are in rural areas, and that's sort of a very tough nut to crack. But I think that was a good roundup and maybe a good segue into the other set of audience that we have, who have already who been working on a project or a startup basically, and COVID hit, right? And since that happened, then they definitely have to either go into some sort of just, let's say, pivotal mode, or some sort of rethinking around features of their existing product or the space itself, because of the crisis that hits us, right? And I think it will be good for them to get some advice, seek some advice on how do you think about your current state of affairs, how do you sort of stabilize your business to optimize for both long-term gains, since you are in it for the long haul, but also take immediate corrective actions, right? So maybe let's, on that note, let's start with Abhinav, since obviously, you're dealing with it right now.
Sure. Thanks, Sanchita. So can you hear me? Sorry.
Yeah.
Okay. So when COVID hit, let me explain our model a little bit, right? So what we do is we go out to medical institutions, so hospitals, diagnostic centers, clinics, and we give them a solution which is an ECG machine bundled with a communicator, and they send out the data back to us, to our central reporting team that uses AI to help do the reporting of these within 10 minutes. That's what we do. Now, when COVID hit, some good things, some bad things. Let me talk about some of the good things. One of the good things that happened was that we had realized that we are a serious medical company. We provide cardiac diagnosis within 10 minutes, so that's serious business. And we embarked on this path of certification, of making sure what we do is done robustly and reliably. And this is something that we started 2 years back. And part of what that meant was that we actually had disaster recovery processes in place. So March 9th, no, I think March 10th, we decided that we are not going to come into office anymore. And by March 12th, our entire team of about 30 doctors were moved working from home. They were doing the same work working from home within 2 days. And that was only because we sort of took it seriously that, hey man, we got to have all of our systems in place to do this. That's the good part. And I would say anyone coming into this space, and if you're doing serious medical work, please, you cannot adopt the same sort of thinking as move fast and break things kind of culture that you may have in most, B2C consumer startups. You have to get a little bit serious about what you're doing. The other thing that did get impacted was sales. Our entire sales force was built on the premise of they will go door to door, knock on doctor's door, and sell them this service. Did we want to do it this way? No, heck no. That's very expensive and very painful to do. But there was resistance on the other side. Doctors are just so busy. They were like, if you are not serious, if you're not coming here and waiting in my waiting room for 2 hours. And we've all waited for doctors. I think they're just used to this sort of concept of come and wait for me. So sales pretty much stopped, right? Because no one could go or do anything. A usage dropped. So what did we do for this? I think one of the things that we did immediately was that we sensed that this is an opportunity as well, that now doctors are willing to get things done over a telephone. This has changed the game for them. They're willing to talk to us on phone. They're willing to get technical support on phone. And I think what we took up was that we are digitally transforming our entire sales force so that they do more of these sales without actually going there in person, right? So it's going to take some time, but at least we sense an opportunity what's going to happen. The third thing that happened that was very good was this by Niti Aayog, when they put out the circular about accepting remote telehealth things. I think that will go a long way in us to for us to basically make the sales easier and have more acceptance around what we're doing. In terms of products, what we did, we like I said, our solution was an ECG machine with a communicator that would send us back the data. But we actually shipped a new product within about 10 days where the doctors could take an image of the ECG machine and send it to us, and we would just report on that image itself. It seems simple, but there are a little bit more complications over there. But what we found was, this became a tremendous tool for us. There were doctors, because many senior doctors would be above 60 years old. They're not visiting hospitals anymore. So a lot of, we realized, infrastructure in India at this point is running with junior doctors. And they really appreciated this support for advanced ECG diagnosis that we were providing them. I don't know where it's going to take us, but we detected about 300 heart attacks just using this image-based diagnosis service that we. So we're doing what we can. The usage is still down because you need footfalls in the diagnostic centers and clinics for them to use our service. But we're hoping they'll come back.
Great. So what I think hear you saying is, of course, there is some level of feature addition since you have to sort of be current and be able to operate even if it is at a suboptimal level, and parallelly you can build engines for the long haul, right? Suryanarayan sir, if you could just add your bit to this on how should founders think about this time.
Yeah, fortunately for us, health is the least affected in this pandemic. And for those who are affected, I have a 4 R's policy. First, recover, revive, repurpose, and then reach out. When you mean recover, first, all discretionary expenditure, make it 0. And then revive by asking other expenses like rent and all that, go to landlords, ask them to postpone it or cancel it. I'll give an example. Printo had some 50 shops. He went to 50 landlords and most of them agreed for a 3-month total waiver of rent. So that's the way to revive. And then it's not going to be business as usual. It's definitely going to change. Now you have people willing to come online, willing to be digital. So you have to repurpose your offerings to suit the new world. And then reach out. Reach out is networking. The entire startup should understand that it's not alone, but you need to network.
Absolutely.
And network is only by asking. Nobody's going to come and give it to you. You have to ask. That's called reach out.
Absolutely. I think that's a good roundup and a good summary of even what Abhinav said, right? Shri, do you want to just add the investor bit to how the investment ecosystem is looking at new opportunities in healthcare? When is a good time to pitch? Is now a good time?
It's actually a really good time for healthcare and digital health in specifically because a lot of the folks that understood what is going to be in the future, COVID has made it reality for many people, right? Everybody's working from home, everybody's on Zoom. What used to be only things for the privileged few is now normal. It's just been seen as an understood concept. So for VCs, we have been still taking pitches. We've had competitions. We've had boot camps going on. We have a boot camp coming up. It's actually almost busier than ever because all of a sudden the hospitals and clinics and healthcare providers and governments around the world are recognizing how underinvested they've been in this space. And so folks are fighting to sort of, I'll give you an example. We, over a 2-day period, enabled 150 practitioners in mental health in New Haven to go telemedicine. That has been a project they've been trying to work on for 3 years. And literally 4 of us went there and sat down over 3 days and enabled all 150 of them. And then we realized we had to, just like the poverty thing, there's a lot of poor people who don't have access. We reached out to the cable companies and got them to give free internet. It turns out we were not the only one asking, the whole country was asking. So major internet providers have now given free internet for the entire 3 months of COVID, right? So I think to the question about asking, you can sort of do that. The status quo of what we thought the future was going to be is present now, right? If you need to go do your cardiac test right now, you don't really want to go into the hospital, right? It's one of the most dangerous places to go into right now. So, any solution that allows me to take my data from my house or my watch or my device and send it in becomes now a very reasonable thing to ask for, as opposed to before it was seen as, oh, that's an interesting startup idea. Now it seems to be very logical. So I think it's a good time for an investment strategy perspective.
Got it. So hearing what I heard from the three of you, yes, of course, there's a huge boost in digital health. In fact, Practo, for example, saw 100% increase in teleconsultations right last month, and that's huge. So I think a very specific question to you, Kiran, right? While there is so much sort of a digital wave happening everywhere, there is also that healthcare data that is flowing, right? And hence comes the issues around data privacy, interoperability, and how do you really take care of something as sensitive as healthcare data. So please give us some insight on that.
Yeah, in fact, I just saw that your poll also showed that many people on this call, do worry or feel that their healthcare data is not private or not safe. And it's indeed a fact. So one of the things, and this has been one of the big areas of debate, even on the National Health Stack and the National Health Blueprint, is how do you ensure that you have a design that can deliver the level of privacy and security that all of us want. And if you look at the recommendations that are there, there are three things that are very, very clear that's kind of coming out. One is the fact that the individual, and if you think about any healthcare data, technically it's co-created, right? In the sense that the hospital and the doctor is the one which actually created the data. Of course, it's about you, but you can't really claim it's yours. So very interestingly, you will also notice that the Sri Krishna committee and now what's called the Personal Data Protection Bill does not use the word ownership. So, but it does talk about what rights you have. And fundamentally, healthcare data is definitely personal data. And the whole design of the health stack is to make sure that you are in control of your data and you decide who can get access to it. The second part of the stack design is something called a federated architecture, so that there is no really single place I can attack and get the data of everyone in the country. Singapore, for example, had an incident where somebody hacked into their system to steal the Prime Minister's health data and then wanted to leak it. So the federated architecture essentially means that in the context of the health stack, the data would live in only two places. Where it's created, and where it's created is basically the hospital, right? So yes, your hospital or your diagnostic center would have a copy. What it means to become a HIP means that you essentially commit that you will keep the data with whatever security practices on behalf of the patient for the regulated medical legal period, which is typically about 7 years in India. And the only other copy is with the patient. So when the patient essentially provides the consent, he's able to pull a copy and he can save it into his own health locker. So the health locker is like your birth to death storage for your records. But now you decide when you go into a new healthcare context, whether it's telemedicine or even a physical walk-in, whether you want to share and what portion of it do you want to share. It's also designed so that you have more control. It is possible that you can separate your records between, say, and we think people are likely to separate mental health records, HIV records out into other like accounts or containers and not say, I want to have it with my general health record. They may not want, in every context to be able to make access to those data, and you should be able to have control over that, right? So I think, and third, it has to work for what we call as Bharat. We have to make sure that this system from a design perspective works for that illiterate person who probably is going to only consent using their biometrics or their face recognition in a healthcare context. So I think a lot of thought and thinking has gone into it. We are very happy that the Personal Data Protection Bill is finally in the parliament and should offer the overarching protection to all citizens, which then puts legal liabilities on the entities which are keeping this data. So whether it's a hospital or whether it's these new entities that I talked about, like a SaaS company that's helping bring this, they would be under the watch and have to meet the data fiduciary guidelines or laws that would apply to as part of the data protection bill. So I think a lot of thought and a lot of this one has already happened to try to make this happen. And so I would urge people to understand, because it's almost in every conversation I go to, people are saying, hey, is it safe? Is it well protected? I would urge people to look at the details, understand that there is a lot of thinking that's already gone into it. And clearly we think that this is going to be something that should be good for India as we go ahead.
Great. I think that's some great insight. In fact, two of the audience members did ask about data privacy, right? And we also saw that happening on the poll. Abhinav, also want to invite your views on the same topic since you do deal with patient data.
Yeah, no, I think Kiran has covered most of it. I'll just add my insights that we've been looking at different countries where we're operating. And all of these, many of these countries have very similar sort of guidelines. Probably US is, they've had older guidelines, but they're behind because their protection on medical data is not as intense as, like a GDPR or a PDPA in Singapore, or even the Indian code that is coming up. I'll just echo what Kiran said. Deep dive into it, understand it. It requires the tech leaders, the thought leaders to really understand what this means and not feel that this is something else where you cannot use data. I think where people get stuck is they get very polarized around this. Hey, I'm not even going to touch this data. It's not like that. It's like you can access it, you can share it, do it responsibly and take care of that data. I think it's great. I think it also increases the value in the ecosystem. Otherwise, you just have, if there is no lowest common denominator, you'll have people building software and selling it for 100 rupees because there's nothing to be met. There's no privacy guidelines, there's nothing required. So, may ecosystem. I'm sorry about that. I'm sorry. I just want to repeat that.
Just lost you for, yeah, we lost you for 5 seconds.
Sure. Then I'll just repeat that, these kind of regulatory frameworks, I think I would encourage entrepreneurs to look at them very positively. They're not hurdles. They actually help and they also create value in the ecosystem.
Got it. Oh, very interesting. I will request the other two panelists also if you want to add something to it. Suryanarayan sir, Shri.
Yeah, let me just add sort of a perspective. I was at a data conference in the US, and the conversation there was about how companies own the data. I was then, the following week, I was in Oxford, and it was with a whole bunch of EU hospitals. And the conversation there was how the patients own the data and how you have to protect the data, GDPR and so forth. Asia is still sort of up and down. Somebody actually asked the question, can you use healthcare data to look at absenteeism and use it for job hiring or not, right? It's an interesting use case. I think, to be competing in a global market, it's not a hurdle, it becomes a barrier for you to sort of use as a moat against all the other competitors, right? So you have to have your data be able to meet GDPR, meet HIPAA guidelines, specifically if you want to do anything in healthcare outside of India, and even India and Asia is going to start having those same guidelines, right? So to me, that's a no-brainer. Because the larger question is, once you have that and once you get that certified, which is by the way, itself is an entire interesting startup business model, right? That service is actually a very valuable service. Is unless we have laws in countries that specifically prevent the misuse of the data, not just the loss in privacy, but to say it is against the law for you to discriminate against hiring somebody because they had depression or they had diabetes, unless you have those specific laws where healthcare data is not used against you, I think you're going to see a very sudden shock and surprise of people recognizing that there's data out there. Now, interestingly enough, I think in the Indian market, consumers don't have as much of a sensitivity to the impact of their loss of their data, right? I have seen Facebook groups where people, literally there's 600,000 people in that group right now who are posting their healthcare data every day, right? Their healthcare labs, their results, their home address, their names and everything else, which if you did that in other parts of the world, you'd go to jail, right? Literally, you would go to jail for that. So there is a consumer gap of understanding of the impact. So I'm hoping that as part of the, and I don't know these Indian laws that are being passed right now, that are folks making sure that the data that is being used for healthcare cannot be used for credit scoring, cannot be used for jobs, cannot be used for discriminatory practices, because you don't really have a choice in some of your healthcare data, right? So and that's what I'm hoping somebody can help answer that question.
Very interesting. So do we have, yeah, I think you're right. Indian audiences probably currently not as sensitive to their healthcare information as is, of course, in India.
Sanjita, just jumping in. Yeah, Indian
Yeah,
audience
of course.
is, there is a small segment. So India is many Indias, as we all know, and
Exactly.
there is a top portion of India which is very similar to the Western markets in terms of expectations and so on. There's a large part of India which will not hesitate to Xerox their Aadhaar card and give it for, it's lying around in every small shop for the smallest of things. So, we do behave in fairly strange ways in that sense. But so one of the things that the data protection bill says that is each sector should come up with its own guidelines on what people can do or can't do with the personal data of that sector. So the health sector is supposed to, once the primary bill is passed, then each sector is supposed to release additional guidelines on that. So there was an earlier draft Disha Act or Disha bill that was kind of put out. So one of the things I think I remember it talked about was, for example, you could not use the health data for determining your insurance premiums or so on, right? So I do think that as these use cases become clear, and it's very hard from a regulatory perspective, I believe, to kind of foresee many of these. And so you usually come in with a certain, the government bureaucracy usually comes in with a certain construct to allow, and, in talking about, what Abhinav was building on that, the whole idea of the health stack is what we call as data empowerment. Our belief is that the data needs to be unlocked primarily to help the patient and the physician provide better care. And so, you do want to do it in a way that kind of make sure that it meets the privacy bills, but it should not be that, oh, I don't want to touch this and I want to run away from, because this has implications or legal or financial implications that may be something that's too hard to bear. So I think it's really about getting that balance.
Yeah.
Understood.
May I add in something?
Of course, of course.
Sure. So I think, Shri, there's a very clear clause, I believe, even in the Indian bill, it's purpose limitation, and that covers data privacy overall, right? So there is a reasonable expectation of what data is collected. There's a reasonable expectation of use. And I think that is unambiguous. I think that's the way it has been implemented. You cannot take this data. If you've collected it for diagnostic purposes, you are supposed to use it for diagnostic purposes. So I think that's pretty well drafted.
Great. I think we are seeing a bunch of questions from the audience. And while some of them we have answered while the course of the discussion, there are some distinct questions. Kesava, I think we should probably take them up as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, great. So I see two questions about alternative medicine, and I know Shri covered that in an earlier part of the discussion very briefly, that's also something interesting. So this question particularly is about, one of them is an alternative medicine practitioner. How can she get in touch with other mainstream providers and sort of, make this as a scalable methodology? And the second question is about what are the opportunities in alternative medicine. So if one of you could take it up.
Yeah, I'm a big follower of alternative medicine. I did that 20 years ago when I started my disease management company. I used to then give music therapy, aromatherapy, all kinds of therapies then. And I was working on Excel sheets. There was no technology at all. So I'm a big optimist. So I've seen the technology grow, and the recent success of IRCTC, Aadhaar, give me confidence that all this naysayers will come on board at some point of time. I'm a big optimist. So of course, implementation is the key. The devil is the details. So that has always been a problem in India.
Got it. Interesting. And
Sanjita, one of the use cases that I have encountered it's a little bit contradictory, but the use case I've encountered is that, we have some customers who are practitioners of alternate medicine, and they come to our service so that they do not take in people for things they were not expecting to people. So for example, if a guy is showing up with chest pain, the alternate medicine provider will want to treat him for heartburn, but does not want to treat him for an ongoing heart attack. So we've kind of come in that use case where we just say that, he's got a heart attack. So now what that person says, he just directs him to a different, more emergency care.
very interesting. I think the Indian government also sort of has that infrastructure in place, right? Where Ayush doctors they, I think, act as great capacity augmenters to the last mile, and we do have that format in place. I think that's exactly sort of a replica that you're seeing probably in the private sector as well, Abhinav, to your point. Maybe moving on to the next question, this one specifically on 3D printing companies. The question has been asked by an anonymous person, so I'll just sort of spell that out. Outside India, there are many 3D printing companies helping the healthcare sector, but in India, there are only a few companies that are doing that. So, you know, what are the huge application areas for 3D printing startups, and what should new startups focus on in this particular space, and what is the direction that we are taking, in case one of you wants to take that question.
Let me take a first pass at least for why I think that is. One key challenge with a lot of the 3D printing technologies around the world is a lot of the patents in that space are international patents in European and the US and North America and so forth. So there's a very large pool of patents that are applicable. And the folks who are holding those patents, while they have filed for global patents, have not really used a lot of their marketing power to come into the Indian market. So the Indian patents that we've seen, we've seen as part of the CCAM NBAC test, over 3,000 healthcare applicants. About a third of those were in devices in 3D and so forth. There's a good number, but the challenge is that the IP that they're creating is only specific to India. That IP cannot be scaled outside of India. And so that has limited the investment in some of these companies. So when I look at a company and they say, oh, we have a patent in India, that's wonderful. Do you have a patent anywhere else? No, we can't, because it's a copy of a German patent. It's a copy of a UK patent or a copy of a US patent or something like that. So that's a limiting of the investment itself. I think that's one. The second thing is, devices are highly regulated and compared to software, right? Highly regulated, and you have to go through clinical trials. So the life cycle of 3D projects, when you actually want to get them to the market, are much, much longer than any software product out there. So I think, or even for that matter, physical products like opening up a clinic or doing anything else in traditional medicine. So between those two components, I think you're seeing a sort of understandable lack of involvement in that space in India. That's just my understanding so far. I could be completely wrong.
Interesting. No, I think you point out a very interesting point that while you can have IP in India, you know, if your innovation is truly a globally valuable asset, it takes you that further, of course, and it opens those deeper markets as well. Completely taken. On that note, I'll sort of move on to the next very different point. Sanchit Singh from the audience, I don't know if you can unmute him and he could ask the question directly, or else I can take it. Kesava, can you unmute him? Sanchit Singh?
Yeah. No, only I think he has to raise the hand.
Okay.
Now, Simona and Vinod raise the hand. Sanchit, you're saying, na?
Yeah.
Okay, I can see. Hey, Sanchit, you can ask your question. Sanchit, unmute.
Yeah, am I audible now?
Yep.
Yeah, hi. Good morning, everyone. Sanchit here from Delhi. So my question is that here it was mentioned that wellness is from a different space, and now we are an early stage startup fitness stores into fitness and wellness, where we provide fitness consultation, online fitness consultation with certified fitness trainers and nutritionists, looking for solutions for weight loss and obesity and related lifestyle diseases like diabetes and thyroid and all. So now my question is that how should we think about integrating wellness with the health tech space, like the health stack, and are there equal opportunities in the wellness space as well?
Can I take that?
Absolutely.
So you're in the right place. So what I suggest is, anyway, all the fitness gyms are going to be difficult to continue as is. So you have to create a mechanism by which you have experts guiding people at home to do all their wellness and focus on nutrition. And then you can have two huge markets. One is the recovery market, other one is the wellness market, so the obesity and diabetes kind of people.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Sure.
Yeah, I think
Okay.
we've also seen some wellness startups adding sort of a telemedicine feature temporarily. I think we saw that even in Profit, right? So while low touch point level of integration is definitely having, I think that's it's happening, and that's the right direction to take. So thank you, Sanchit. I guess we'll move on to the next question now. Slightly interesting one. Basically, comparing two markets, India and US, that are, of course, we understand very different in some of these aspects. So Abhi Shetty, if we can unmute him, he can perhaps directly ask the question.
Abhishek Tiwari?
Abhi Shetty.
Nice.
Abhi Shetty. Yeah.
Yeah, Abhi, you can go and ask.
Yeah, my question was basically related to India and US. We have two markets where there's a lot of development in healthcare and technology and digitization of the healthcare stack. So is there something which we can borrow from, say, the US and adapt it out here rather than start everything from scratch?
Can I take that, Sanchita?
Yeah. So, of course.
Yeah.
Kiran.
Yeah. So, Abhi, I mean, I think there are Indians, I think maybe some of us have, to some extent, there's been in lots of debates, I see that the one market that we should not copy is the US. They've spent also, if you look at on the digital health side, they spent billions of dollars, especially during the Obamacare period, to make sure that a large number of primary care physicians and GPs adopted EMR. But if you look at the ability for sharing EMR in the context of a patient, less than 6%, I believe, or I've seen some reports which are with really dismal numbers on the ability to actually share health data in the context of a patient. So, and secondly, I think, many of these Western markets, India also, you have to realize, has very, very different dynamics because we have very low insurance penetration. A lot of technology in general around the world, wherever health tech was driven by governments, have been driven by payers and have largely emerged because payers have driven or asked hospitals and diagnostic centers or whatever else in the healthcare system to kind of develop certain tech for the process of payments in many ways. So that's a little bit of a, the environments are very different between the two. And one, of course, the personal data on the legal side, I think India has done, India has actually taken a third path. I mean, in many ways, we are also different from GDPR in quite a few ways in terms of the path we have chosen. And I do believe that many of the elements that India has taken up as part of the personal data protection bill are actually worth emulating by other countries in the world as we kind of go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Kiran, for that view. Is there a contrarian view across the panel? I'm very curious to know. Can we actually take learnings from US in any of the areas?
I'll have both. I'll agree with Kiran. I actually think the one thing that you don't want to learn from the US market, and I've been here, it's a context, right? It was last year, the healthcare market in the US alone was $3.4 trillion US dollars. Okay, 17% of GDP, right? And we have one of the worst outcomes in the OECD countries, right? I still have to fax my healthcare records all over the place. It's a mess. And to your point, they decided to, and somebody asked the question earlier, how do we get all these folks to use the electronic health records? The Obamacare decided that they were not going to fight the physicians and they were going to incent them. Each physician practice got per physician $14,000 from the government to implement electronic health records. So they just basically wrote checks to say, look, if you go electronic, we'll write you a check. What they didn't do is say, you have to use standardized formats, right? Even though HL7 and FHIR are standardized technologies in healthcare, it was not mandated. Interoperability is being discussed now and being pushed to being mandated, right? So to me, the US market from a healthcare technology perspective is an example of just throwing money at a problem doesn't solve it, right? It's clearly not a functional thing. I would actually look more at some of the European markets where they have had more government intervention. And Kiran is absolutely right. The payer decision drives all the startups. In fact, in the US, anytime I mentor a startup, my first question is, who's the payer? Who pays? If you can't answer who pays, you need to go dig some more, right? So it doesn't matter if it's a great healthcare solution. If nobody's interested in paying, it doesn't matter. So that's actually another lesson I think that the Indian market can learn from, which is Indian market as it matures will have payers, right? With a market of 1 billion people, the insurance market will scale. It will. US has only 300 million people and has a large insurance market, right? India with 1 billion people, it will have a market. So the folks who can plan ahead, I think, have an interesting opportunity to think about what that looks like. So I actually, instead of being contrarian, I would say that one of the reasons why we spend so much time in the global markets looking at healthcare products is that we think actually the ideas from India, China, and Europe actually have a better chance of being successful in the US because their cost basis is so much better and their technology sometimes is so much better, right? The major US main EMR system is still based on 1970s technology, right? So let's not have India do that, please.
Very interesting point of view, I guess. I think we have a bunch of other questions, but I just want to stop here and ask Kesava if we have the time to continue.
Sanchita, we have a time actually. We can go up to the 11:45 or 12. Actually. 12 is the one max. Okay. Yeah. So, and you are a co-host. You can enable them actually. You can right-click and enable talking.
Okay. So maybe in interest of time, I'll just talk through the questions myself. Maybe that will be faster. So one of the founders is asking a key challenge they see in being an operator in this space is finding the right talent in healthcare. And if you do not find that right talent, how do we scale? So maybe I'll just invite views here across the table, particularly maybe from Abhinav, Suryanarayan. What do you think about this problem? You relate to it first of all, and then any cope-up mechanism.
I will give you an example. Arvind Eye Hospital found that there's a big problem. So he picked up all the girls from the villages, brought them here, trained them well, and made them just-in-time nurses. So that the specialists come only like a stack only for the key stuff. So that way you have to look ahead, plan, train. Training is the key. Training in technical skills and soft skills.
Got it. Abhinav?
Yeah, it's a real problem. I wish I had medical product managers. I wish I had senior doctors who could become product managers because that's what we really need, right? So it's a problem. You have to look, you have to hunt, you have to pay for it. It's very expensive to get a senior doctor in there to really build a world-class product and put that sort of product thinking. You need a senior person, you'll have to pay for it. But there are a few doctors who, want to do, I think it's picking up now. There are doctors who want to do more than clinical practice simply because, many times we find that it's not something that maybe that's not the way they want to work. And many times we find doctors who want to do this kind of work is because they can actually treat more patients by participating in a startup than they would as a doctor. But the problem is real, for sure. I don't have any clear solutions. I think what helped us out a lot more is our CEO is a cardiologist. I think if you're doing any serious work in here, please have a doctor on your team. I don't think you can get away with that.
I think that's a great point. In fact, in one of the last conversations we had with on the same platform with NSRCL, was one of our recommendations was that whenever we are trying to evaluate startups ourselves, since I particularly look at healthcare, we do look at the team composition, right? And having a doctor on the team definitely gives you sort of that added edge because you empathize with the problem all the more. So I think that's a great point, Abhinav.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just emphasize that more because we realize that, you cannot, doctors exist almost on a different plane. To even engage with doctors, you need this interlocutor. It's not easy. It's not, I came from a software world where everything is programmatic, here, you do this. But the language that doctors are instilled is about protocols and, it's not as precise as one would think medicine is, at least when I got in there. So yeah, definitely get someone who's an expert.
I think that's a great pointer. So to the next point, right, about funding and financing, and since I think a trend in healthcare and particularly medtech is that we have these government bodies or funds, or even in some cases some private sector funds that can be accessed at an early stage, right, until you reach a certain level where you can then access the investor capital or larger pools of capital. So I think would love some advice from you on what are the different government bodies that can be approached. What is that gestation period till which you should build out for to later, maybe approach mainstream investors. Shri, do you want to take that question?
Yeah, I mean, so I highly recommend early stage startups to reach out to both your local state government bodies and also the national government bodies, right? In Bangalore, for example, CCAM, which is a part of the Ministry of Technology, has some very, very excellent programs, right? NRCL also has some excellent programs where they connect you with the big grants, the BIRAC grants. So there's a series of programmatic grants. NBAC itself has some additional grants available. Goldman Sachs program has some grants available. I think for early stage startups that are at seed or pre-seed level, we often recommend that you use the grant process as a way to refine your business plan, to raise your funding, and also a way to get funding, unlike angel funding, that doesn't dilute your equity. Right, so you not just get funds, but you often actually end up getting a lot of mentorships and access to incubator programs and accelerator programs, which we think are invaluable in the early stages, especially for healthcare companies, because you do need clinicians, you do need highly specialized skill sets, and having that level of support makes all the difference. So we've been very lucky with folks like Social Alpha, which is a part of Tata Consulting and the ministry. We've been very lucky with CCAM, we've done NRCL. We've had very good luck with working with folks like you. And I think that's the only reason why we're in India. We wouldn't try to do it by ourselves. We definitely want to partner with the government and academic institutions.
Interesting. Got it.
So I'll recommend those who are interested, try and get into the Launchpad program of NSSL, one of the best programs I have seen.
I hope everyone's taken a note of that. We got a bunch of interesting names, I think. So moving on to my next question, probably. Yes, so I think it's sort of an inevitable one in fintech and healthcare equally. How can blockchain help in health tech, right? In terms of course, e-records, and what are sort of those gray areas that can be addressed?
Yeah, so look, I think it comes up almost invariably in many discussions that I've been part of. So just two viewpoints. I don't think blockchain is probably going to be very useful at some point, but we do worry about both in terms of resources and compute power that's required really today for really large scale kind of implementations, whether we should be adopting blockchain. But many of the underlying blocks that we have defined and we've been part of the national health stack, we do believe that those implementation teams and those the groups that will actually go out to build them should, and if required, consider blockchain for the underlying pieces. The standardization is really happening at the open API layer, which is about communication between components. And if for underlying component blockchain is an effective use, I think I don't think there's anything stopping that from being it. To be fair, I have not yet seen something that really excites me as like, look, this is blockchain. This will be done in blockchain, and that's my real challenge in terms of the model.
Great, thank you for that view. I think, and on that note, Kesava, I think we are on time. It's 11:45. I would like to invite some closing comments from all of you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Great. So why don't we start? Maybe Suryanarayan sir from you.
I'm saying stay optimistic and postpone raising funds as much as possible, at least to first quarter 2021. Because this is not the right time, because you get beaten in the valuation. Sanjita and Sri will kill you. And this is the time.
Sri, you are on a mute.
No, I say he's right.
So at this point of time, try and do two things. One, create consumer wow and perfect all your, and the top line focus is gone nowadays. The Flipkarts of the world no longer exists. So you have to look at how to raise bottom line. So focus on that. And at this point stage, 80% of your expense should be revenue generating. Other things discretionary should be postponed as much as possible. So do that, and then you perfect your model and listen to your customers. They are the best teachers for you.
Thank you so much. I think that's a great view, right? And for someone who's obviously operated as well as advised, I would definitely recommend listening to him. And yes, maybe not the best time to sort of raise, maybe until you, of course, perfect your business models. I think businesses that will emerge out stronger from this situation are definitely going to receive a premium, right? So on that note, Sri, anything to add to that?
No, I think he's right. I think one tip that I would give to startups if you're looking to raise money is you should be planning 6 months to a year ahead of when you need to raise money. So this is actually a really good time to actually reach out to potential partners, potential investors, potential biz dev folks to start building the relationships so that in next year, when you start actually going there to say, hey, I need this money, you have some traction to show them, that you have some track record of what has happened over the last 6 to 9 months, and you are now asking for it. The hardest thing for insurance teacher, you probably know this, is like people will say, I'm raising money, I need to have the money by next month or 6 months from 3 months from now. And that's the first time they've talked to you. That's a very tough sell, right? And so building that relationship ahead of time, and this is actually a good time to build a relationship. So to take the opportunity.
I think. You went on the mute?
Hey, sorry, did you call out my name? But I'll go ahead. Hey, can you hear me, Sanjita?
Yeah, Abhinav.
Oh, okay. I'll come from a different angle because I'm on the software side and the technical architect side. I think the advice I'll give on the technology side is that this is serious work. If you're trying to do anything in healthcare, be it you're building a system for creating the APIs that you're going to transfer data, or an AI that you're building, or a viewer to look at medical data, it's serious business in this, no matter what you're doing. So set your teams up, set your own attitude up in that way right from the get-go, that everything's going to be done at very high quality, understand the certifications and regulatory aspects that are involved. It's a little bit counterintuitive to Bangalore development startup culture, where you're just experimenting with new things. A lot of software developers are all the new tech and everything. It's more for some technology may not be suitable. It's designed for fast scaling, but it may not be designed for robustness. So be careful over there about your technology choices.
Thank you. I got disconnected for a bit, but please go on.
I guess I'm the last guy left, so let me wrap it up. So I think exciting times in my view, guys. As a startup, I think there is going to be lots of interesting new opportunities. So if you're in the very early stages, I think I would advise you to keep an eye out for some of the new things that are happening on this national health stack, and there may be some opportunity peeking around the corner where you spot something that you can help solve for. And I think what Abhinav and the others are giving are really good advice. I think building a startup is a long, it's a marathon, it's a long journey, and then make sure that you're really committed to the idea and that you're willing to spend many years on working on an idea, and that's something that will keep you going and you're passionate about it. I think that's what really counts in the end.
Thank you so much for that. I think I'm just going to leave the audience with probably a blog post, which is inspired from one of our portfolio co-founders, Manish Sharma from Printo. Surya Narayan sir actually brought him up in an earlier part of the discussion. And it's all about becoming a wartime CEO, right? I just want to leave everyone with sort of that message. I think it's a good read. It keeps your motivations high. And we really hope we've been able to bring some interesting insights to everyone.
Hey, thank you, Sanchita, and thank you, Kiran, Surya, Abhinav, and Shri. Especially Shri, yeah, you are in the US, and I know it's midnight actually. Thank
Good
you.
thing to do on a Friday night.
Yeah, we'll do, yeah. So, yeah, that's the best way to spend a Friday night. Okay. Thank you, guys. Actually, thank you very much, and it's wonderful. Actually, once again, special thanks from the NSR, sir. Have a great weekend.
Thank you, guys. Thanks, Sanjita. Thank you.
Thank you.